we don't want to let go of our projections because that means we actually do have to do the healing work. And the healing work is actually the integrating work. Most of the time, what we're healing is not what people have done to us, but who we've become because of it.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 34th episode of Soror Mystica. We are here today to discuss the experience and process and approach to healing, being a healer, and all of the sort of complicated and beautiful detail that goes into the healing process. So a little bit of an episode where we take you away from a strict symbol and are interested in interpreting and sitting with a kind of conceptual or experiential thing rather than that. So we're excited to dive in there. But first, Mariana, do you want to share a bit about what you are promoting right now, what we have coming up for you professionally?
Yeah, I am doing the Archetypal Tarot 101 seminar. It's happening Monday, April 22nd. And it is a quick 2-hour seminar just to kind of drop everybody into what does it mean to approach tarot through a psycho-spiritual lens, through an archetypal lens? How do we use the cards for that deep, soulful, poignant self-reflection? So we're going to have spreads, and we're going to have reading lists, and we're going to have pretty slides, and we're going to have lots of juicy things to make it all make sense and put it together. And this is like my best-selling kind of thing. So I haven't like done it live and kind of updated everything and put it together again in a refreshed way with better spreads and more resources and all that. So it's going to be great. So I hope to see you there, and there you can still get a ticket up until I think probably the 21st. I might leave it open a little bit on the 22nd, but it's happening 7 p.m. Eastern time on the 22nd. So make sure you get your ticket before then, and I hope to see you there.
Very exciting. Yeah, for anybody who tunes into this show and is like really curious about Mariana's approach, this is an amazing way to kind of get immersed into her perspective, which I think is the best tarot perspective.
Thank
so
you.
Everybody should do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So I'm not working on anything right now, but I am teaching astrology for beginners, which is really nice because I have never taught a beginner's class before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of reacquainting myself with my own foundations, which is really
I'm
sweet.
in it. I'm taking it.
In it.
It's
I'm
nice
so
review for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. I'm loving it so much so far. So it's gonna be a very good, intellectually stimulating few weeks.
Mm-hmm. That's how we like it around here. So anyway, what are you reading these days?
What am I reading? I have just finished so many books. Well, we just finished the autobiography of Red. That was our book club.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be reading now. I guess it's fine to announce it because we'll be announcing it shortly. We're going to be reading When God Was a Woman in our next installment of the book club, which is a book that changed my life when I first read it. I don't know, like 7 years ago or something like that. So it is a life-changing book of like one of the most of all time, and it will absolutely change your perspective on understanding patriarchy from a place of what I call sacred feminism, which is, through a feminism that is based in spirituality and based in reclaiming those archetypes of the feminine. And it is actually an intellectual academic book rather than being like a fluffy kind of new agey, let's reclaim the goddess kind of thing. There's vibes of that, obviously, because of the content of it. But no, it's scholarship. Without being dry. It's actually not written by an archaeologist. It's written by like an art historian, I think, or like an artist who is like, her name is Merlin Stone, which is awesome. So 70s. And she's just like, let's study this for real in a way that people haven't before. And so it's really good, really readable, and amazing. So we're both jumping into that. For me, the second time, and for you, I think it's the first time, right?
Yep, but I've got my
Mhm.
copy. I'm ready to go,
Mhm.
and I'm really excited. I opened the intro the other night, and so, yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it finally.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
it's gonna be great. And I think that other than that, I just finished a couple novels, like fluffy novels that I was reading. I just listened to an audiobook of interviews with Paul Simon, which made me cry
I love
the
that.
whole time.
Mhm.
Paul Simon is really random for me, but my favorite musical artist of all time, and no one will ever beat him in my view. He has a Cancer moon like I do, so I think that's the
Mm,
reason.
mhm.
Anyway, so that was fun. What are you reading?
Reading a bunch of stuff, and I've never ever in my life listened to an audiobook, but I'm listening to one. It's Ariadne. Who's the author? Is it Jennifer Saint? So it's just a retelling of the Labyrinth myth, but in this novelized way. And I'm just looking for things to fill my brain with that aren't my own neurosis.
You're
Haha, we'll be talking about this
a
in this episode. So
little
anyway, I
preview.
started that. It's pretty good. I'm like halfway sold on it. We'll see. Because I feel very attached to the labyrinth myth. I feel very protective of how these
Yeah,
characters are being rendered. So I'm just like, but it's
I
fine.
get
So
it.
I'm listening to that, and I picked
I
up this weekend. Oh, what? Tell me.
I was just gonna ask how you like the audiobook situation.
I feel like I'm just listening to a podcast, but I really like the physical experience of reading books. And I feel
Yeah.
like I'm not going to think to myself that I've read that book after I'm done with this. I'm just going to be like, I know what it's about. It's just a strange
I
thing.
feel like I'm kinder when I listen to the book than when I read the
Mm,
book. I am a
mm.
very harsh critic of books as
I want to see the words. I want to see the
Yeah.
words. Hmm.
But then I judge the words and I'm like, they're not in the nice order. They're not pretty. They don't look good on the page. This
Yep.
is not good enough. And then I'm very judgy. And I feel like when I'm listening, I'm a little bit more receptive, which is interesting, a little bit more
Well,
like into it.
yeah, you're like immersed and you're not, yeah, we judge so much when we are
Yeah.
seeing things.
Anyway,
Well,
you were saying you picked up something this weekend.
oh, yeah. I went to the bookstore and I went kinda crazy. So, I just yesterday sat with, Joseph Campbell's Occidental Mythology, which is
Hmm.
just, like, part of that Masks of God series that he
Yeah.
has, and it's really, really interesting and really useful, so that's, like,
Hmm.
a great reference text,
Yeah.
and I started recently, there's a new translation of Ovid's Metamorphosis that is
Oh,
by
nice.
a really, I think, young scholar. Their name is C. Luke Susi. And it's, yeah, like an updated translation. The Metamorphosis is so intense because a lot of it is just about like overpowering, like gods overpowering women and stuff like that. And it has this reputation for being a bit dark, and it's got that like Roman sex edge to it, and it's kind of intense. But this translator seems to be very, very caring and careful about rendering what the text from Latin actually says about those episodes, and talks a lot about how the kind of sexual element has been sensationalized and amplified in previous translations. And I think that in recent scholarship around new translations of the Odyssey by Emily Wilson, I think I saw that as well, that she basically discovered that the way that women were described in these ancient epics as like hypersexualized, and hypersexualized interactions between them and the men in the stories wasn't necessarily in the original text, but translators
Interesting.
kind of did that. Yeah, so I'm very interested in translation. I'm not like an expert at all, but the concept of it is really curious
No,
to me.
yeah.
So yeah.
So, we're talking about healing, and we wanted to talk about this because I personally have been teaching a class for my past archetypal tarot students on how to be professional tarot reader, and so a big focus of that has been how to facilitate the healing work. And this is something that you do every day in your own practice. Your astrology practice is trying to facilitate people's healings through self knowledge and understanding, their place in the cosmos and all of that. So I this is an idea of a topic I've had in the back of my head for a while. Like how do we engage with healing more consciously, talk about it, talk about how we facilitate that for people.
Mhm.
Um, And yeah, hopefully get some clarity on what it means to actually heal and what it means to guide people through healing, because we know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are healers in some capacity. um yeah, what are your thoughts
Mhm.
on where we should start with healing?
Yeah, I think it's a really I loved this idea when you presented it, and I think that it's a really complicated topic because we live in a world that is has normalized healing as something that has a kind of telos to it and a terminus point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we had before we started being on here, like I have a headache today, so I needed to like
Hmm.
get up and take Advil, and like
Hmm.
I'm healed from my headache. I actually feel a lot better. So thank you,
That's
Advil.
good.
But yeah.
I'm really glad.
So we expect that to be what healing is. And I think that we live in a world that kind of pollutes our atmosphere, both physically and psychically. And we live in a world
Hmm.
that prevents us from feeling whole and grounded and okay.
Hmm.
And then we're sold a lot of quick fixes and things
Yeah.
that are supposed to make us feel like we're healed or getting better or something like that. And it's all very much a lie, not to
Hmm.
sound too over the
It's a
top.
lie.
So it's a big
Yep.
lie. And I think that what we're going to kind of circle around in this episode is the fact that healing is experiential and constant. And we talked about this in our spiral episode, I think, of
Yeah.
like always coming back around to the main source of our pain or our problem. And I see that as the kind of focus of my work is having
Yeah.
people be able to orient themselves to the central questions from different vantage points and feel like they're gaining wisdom or feel like they're gaining perspective along the way, rather than being like, boom, no more trauma, no more like issues with your dad. You're great. Everything's fine. It's just, it's a lie. So, um, I'm apparently very negative today. So we're going to talk about we're going to talk about this, but maybe that feels resonant and maybe that feels like a good place to kind of open this up.
I think it's an important place to start, because you're totally right, and we don't talk about this a lot, but publicly we talk about it a lot privately. That we have a lot of critiques for the kind of spiritual community and the way it's developed. Um, there's so much value in it. I am glad that I am of the generation where we see this transformation
Mhm.
of spirit, or the reawakening of spirituality. And I very much feel like that is exactly where we are. This generation living right now is seeing a major shift in the psycho spiritual kind of awakening. We are post structured religion in many ways,
Mhm.
and we don't yet have new forms, and so we're in this liminal space. And so much of the focus of this spiritual work has become healing work. And I think that is very interesting, because our focus is not as much on, like, if we're on TikTok or we're on Instagram, a lot of the people who are spiritual voices in the community are not talking as much about, how to approach wholeness, how to know yourself, how to, explore what do you think God is, and ask these big questions. Instead, the focus is so much on healing, 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 healing. And I think that is beautiful. I think that there's a lot of pain that we all experience, and I
Mhm.
think more than that, there's a lot of awareness around pain that we haven't had
Mhm.
before. I don't think we are a generation who's now experiencing pain for the first time. I think that we
Mhm.
just now have language to describe it, identify it, and recognize that it's not something we need to suffer through needlessly, and that there is a possibility to heal it. At the same time, I think that healing has become a word that's sort of like a band-aid that does not have real depth to it. It is not actually affecting the change that we are trying to get to. And so I think it's a word that has become a little bit, I don't know, bypassy in the
Mhm.
spiritual
Oh
community.
yeah.
It doesn't really do the thing that we think it's doing. And so I'm always very conscientious about using that word, careful using it. But you and I both literally do healing work, in that like for me, when I have a client come in, I'm not going to heal their dad trauma. No chance. But I might be able to help them see it more clearly. And if they can see it
Yes.
more clearly, they might get closer to healing the open wounds within themselves that haven't been
Mhm.
tended to. And that's our goal, is to help them figure out how to heal themselves.
Mhm.
Not because we have particular expertise in exactly how you do it. We don't. Well, we do, but we also don't. I mean, like, we have expertise in our modalities and what our
Mhm.
modalities say, but we don't have expertise in what it's like to heal every pain and every wound.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we also get a little bit, you know, scammy in the spiritual world, where people are like, this is how you heal. Every single
Mhm.
person experiences healing a different way, and healing is always a deeply personal, interior process that
Mhm.
is never, you can't replicate it ever. It has to be deeply personal. And so that's why the true work of a healer is to help people figure out how they do that healing work for themselves,
Mhm.
rather than to promise that you can do it for them. Um, but yeah, I think that that's kind of a good sort of like place to start in challenging what we think of as healing, and the prevalence of it in the community, and trying to bring it into a more realistic kind of definition.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we're the first. I liked what you were saying about we're not the first generation to experience pain at all.
Yeah.
There's obviously trauma writ large over every generation's experiences, but we are the first generation to have the kind of commodification of self care. And I
Yeah.
remember exactly where I was when I first got very angry about the term self care. I was
I
like
love that you have that
waiting.
memory.
I was so mad. I was waiting for the Q train at the Cortelu stop in Brooklyn, and I was just
Perfect.
like thinking about, and it was really hot. It was summer. I was just like mad. I think I was just mad because it was hot. And but I'm often mad. So I was thinking about how dumb it is that this is something, because I was just looking at my phone and there were so many ads and articles. This was like years ago at the time where there was like this big
Got to be
online
like
boom.
2015.
Yeah, around
Yeah.
like women's like, like it was like a very like feministy time on the internet, and everybody was talking about how we need self-care because patriarchy has taken away our
Mm-hmm.
comfort and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, this is just a way of making us go shopping. And
Yeah. Buy
it
bath
was just
bombs and
exactly,
destroy your
yes.
pH, and then go to
Yes.
the gynecologist and buy more pills.
And it's a never-ending loop
Yeah.
of torturing yourself because you are a woman.
And
And
then be
so,
angry at the patriarchy because your gynecologist doesn't believe that you have any
oh
problems.
my God. And then your gynecologist won't believe that you have PCOS. Anyway, it just goes on forever. So I don't feel good again.
I'm sorry. Oh.
Anyway, so yeah, so I think that in terms of our orientation to healing as a generation now, we do have this amazing opportunity to kind of orient ourselves to healing in a different way. Like
Yeah.
people, I think, used to take comfort in the fact that life was like pretty much stable, and you could like count on like, the family system being normal, and religion existed, and communities existed, and now everything is very much broken and unstructured. And maybe that's good, because maybe those systems and structures were also fallacies. But
Yeah.
I think that in what happens in breaking all that open is that there's a lot of pain, a lot of neurosis, a lot of anxiety that we all live with now as a result of that. And so I think that part of our work is orienting people to what you said before, of like seeing the questions more clearly, and then finding truth in the questions. And I think that part of what I always try to orient my clients to is like the fact that they do not have to have answers to the questions. They
Yeah.
just need to understand what the specific questions are for
Yep.
their life. And they get to
Yep.
be in relationship with what the response is forever. And that's just going to be part of the story. And that doesn't mean that you're not healing. And it doesn't mean that you're not understanding yourself or growing. It just means that, if we take astrology at face value, it says you've incarnated with these challenges and these skills. So finding integration is about bridging that gap. And it doesn't mean we wipe the slate clean and we get to like feel pure. That's
Mm-hmm.
just, again, it's not part of the human
Mm-hmm.
experience, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. So,
Yeah.
yep, that's what I see there.
Yeah, it speaks to what you were saying. The term you used, like right before you jumped on, was the fallacy of healing. There
Mm-hmm.
is, I honestly believe there is no such thing as healing, and
Mm-hmm.
that might be like a very hot take and sound crazy. I don't think that there's any such thing as surpassing the challenges that we are born into, we experience, particularly those that come with like how we're raised and the experiences that have been harmful to us and all of these things. They never stop being bad.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go back into the past and make things correct. At best, we can understand how we got here, how has it shaped us, and all of that stuff. So the healing work is really a work of acceptance and bringing it
Mm-hmm.
into wholeness. And this is kind of what we can do with reorienting a sense of a definition for ourselves of healing, is rather than it mending, fixing, repairing, I think that it's more appropriately, as you said, integrating, blending, understanding, accepting, acknowledging, and bringing into wholeness. And I think that this is what Jung really said about the individuation process. You might call the individuation process today the process of healing. We would kind of think of it that way, and that it is this process of like rising above our neuroses and our complexes and all of that stuff. But this is where we get caught, is that we think of it as fixing, as repairing, as mending, rather than understanding, accepting, and integrating.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can shift that focus into how do I become whole again rather than how do I become fixed,
Mm-hmm.
really, really remarkable things can shift for us. And when I'm in a session with a client, they often come looking for something to be fixed. Um, a lot of times, what they want fixed is their inability to understand why they can't move forward, or their sense of, you know, they don't have the same feelings for their partner that they once had, or they have a decision on the table and they just can't make it, and they keep getting oscillating between this and that and the other thing, and they want to be fixed, they want to be healed. They want to say, okay, well, what's the problem? Let's locate the problem and give me the thing that's going to make it all better.
Mm-hmm.
And I refuse outright. I will never do it. I find it useless. And I find it often when I honestly think that if I were to give somebody an answer, the healing word or focus, they're not going to believe it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to do it. And it's just going to make them more upset in the long run, because it's not going to have come from a place of their own wisdom. And it's also not going to do the thing that the deeper psyche is actually looking for, which is to integrate the tension and understand it. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone says, do I leave my husband or not? If I were to say, look, the cards are really bad, leave him, don't stay there, the person's probably going to sit there for another 3 weeks still
Yeah.
spiraling about it and not believing it and not knowing what to do. The idea in my work is always to say, where do you not understand yourself in this?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that sense of wisdom that would make the choice or initiate the healing? Why is that not accessible? How do we find that? And I love the way you put it. It's like, how do we find the actual question that we're
Mm-hmm.
looking to ask? If you can find the question, as Rilke says, then we'll perhaps one day live into the answer, right? Then
Mm-hmm. It's
we'll
beautiful.
follow it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's honestly one of the reasons why I so infrequently approach the tarot, because like on my own, unless I'm like really maybe in a moment, and then that's obviously not the moment to approach the cards. But the longer I've existed, with tarot as a tool at my disposal that I understand, the more I've become aware of the importance of having the question or a
Yeah.
version of the question, and not just like pulling a card and being like, what do I do? Or what's wrong with me? Or, is he going to come back? Or is this going to end? It's like there is so much wisdom in your tools and in mine, that approaching it with that sort of flip surface level mentality does not yield an answer that is satisfying. It then
Yeah.
kind of spits it back at you. And so,
Yeah.
you have to really not to put pressure on ourselves and make sure that we have the perfect query every time, but we have to be approaching the use of the tools with this idea that I'm like literally confused about a piece of my soul
Yeah.
at this moment in time. And that's what's causing this issue that I'm having. I'm having, relationship problems because of some undiscovered kind of tangle in my own heart, not because my partner doesn't do XYZ thing for me and why do I live with them? Like
Right.
it's not that. It always has to come back to us. And I think that that's another thing that's challenging about doing healing work is that we have to really break down our projections that
Yeah.
we have about the people around us that we
Yeah.
struggle and suffer with, because that's part of the human experience as well.
Yeah.
And that's really triggering to do,
Yeah, most people don't
when we're
wanna let go
suffering.
most people don't
Mhm.
wanna let go of their projections. I think
Their
that we don't.
narratives, yeah.
Yeah, they
Mhm.
need them. I honestly think that projections can be very useful sometimes because it does signal that there's some part of the unconscious that is at least slightly rising its head up. It's like
Mhm.
it's visible, just not in me and other
Mhm. Yeah.
people, but not in me.
Mhm.
And I think that we can use projections. One of my internal practices that I try very hard for myself to do, and it's unsuccessful often, of course, is to try to ask myself, what of these tensions or these frustrations am I feeling right now are just projections about what I don't want to look at internally. And
Mhm.
I try to ask like anytime I'm fighting with my husband, I try to sit myself down and growl through it. Like, what am
Mm.
I projecting? And just try to figure it out because it's always happening under the surface, but we don't want to let go of our projections because that means we actually do have to do the healing work, and the
Mhm.
healing work is actually the integrating work. Most of
Mhm.
the time what we're healing is not what people have done to us, but who we've become because of it.
Ah, perfect.
And
That's the clip. That's a great yes.
and that's the part we don't want to face. That's the thing we
Mhm.
don't want to do. We don't want to have to look at who we have become and
Mhm.
what responsibility we have over it. And no matter how someone else has harmed you, you're never going to go undo the harm. The only power you have is to say, who am I now? How do I act now? What is the life I live at this point? And that's the only power we have over healing, which we now have established is really integrating, bringing in, accepting. And when I say accepting, I don't mean like forgiving and just saying, that's fine.
Right.
I can
Right.
be a bitch. That's great. That's not really, I mean, you can, I guess, if you really want to,
You
you're
can do
allowed
that if
to.
you want.
You totally can. I love it. So I'm a proponent. But I think that ultimately it's about looking at the depths of the soul, that soul level, as you were saying, like that tangle. Is this me? Is what part of me am I not seeing? Why am I behaving this way? This is covering up for a truer, authentic experience of myself. And that's what I want to get to. And so I have to
Mhm.
also look at this way I'm behaving and this way that I'm causing harm to myself and in the world often,
Mhm.
and fix that by accepting it, by accepting I do it and trying to get at what's truer about me.
Mhm.
And I think that that word truth is important. And I have this little quote. I have this book called Healers on Healing, which is just like this collection of like little very short snippets from essays of different healing people. And this one comes from John E. Upledger. And he writes that in the therapeutic process, the single most important factor seems to be the ability of the therapist to reflect back the truth to the patient. For it is truth that heals. Truth is the golden thread found in all effective therapeutic systems.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he's basically saying here that what our job is as healers and what our job is for ourselves is to find the truth. If we find the
Mhm.
truth and we follow the truth, we'll get closer to the wound. If we get closer to the wound, we might be able to accept the thing underneath it. The healing comes naturally through the embrace of the wound.
Mhm.
And I know you have a lot of thoughts on the wound and how that kind of, with your work on
Yeah.
Chiron and everything, you've talked to me a lot about that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that yeah, thanks. That's a nice little segue. And I was actually thinking about like the thread idea first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll offer two sort of like mythic versions of this, but thinking about the thread, I'm sure that the golden thread is like a reference to something that I don't exactly know. But in the labyrinth mythology, we have the thread of Ariadne, which is actually like a spool of thread that she's holding as what's his name? Theseus goes into the
Mhm.
labyrinth to find the Minotaur and kill the Minotaur, and that can easily be a kind of stand-in for like going into the maze of the psyche, meeting the
Mhm.
shadow, meeting the kind of inner monster, um, and then following that thread back out to the outside of the labyrinth to then continue your path of individuation. But something I learned recently was that that spool of thread is actually called a clue, and that's like a
Mm.
sewing word.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's not like a, but it has that amazing. Obviously, it's like the same word as a clue, like a hint, as something that leads us to the next thing that we're discovering. So in the great mystery of life. And I thought that that was really
How
lovely.
perfect.
So it's really cool. So that's there. And then, one of the most profound, there are many different healers in the mythic landscape. We've got Asclepius, we've got Apollo, who is the god of healing, but Chiron is the most important kind of figure because he is the most complicated, I think. And so, his famous story is that he is this great healer, but he has a wound on his body that he can't heal. And so he heals other people while not being able to fix his own pain. And eventually he has to like sacrifice his life. He trades his immortality for Prometheus's like sentence in the underworld, having his liver eaten out. And he goes down into Hades and he dies, and that's how he finds relief. And so we don't have to die to find relief, but there is some kind of important image of holding the tension, I think,
Yeah.
of being a healer while also having wounds yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something that we talk about a lot. And also in your own, for those of you who don't practice these modalities professionally, or don't offer readings to people and stuff like that, healing is always the process of being in relationship with the fact that you are a whole person moving around in the world while you're also carrying these really deep, private, profound wounds and stories that you
Yeah.
have that are going to be yours. And so, we don't have to, like I said, sacrifice ourselves because of the wound like Chiron does, but we do have to find ourselves in an orientation to it where we are acknowledging the wound. Because I think
Yeah.
that something that happens with our pain is that we ignore it because there's a lot of denial around the root cause or the root source or how we've responded to our trauma or our pain, and then
Mhm.
it festers and it
Yeah.
doesn't even have a chance at like getting oxygen to it or finding
Mhm.
a way to scab over a little bit. So um, that as an astrologer I think is interesting because unlike with the tarot, which is kind of like a temporal reflection
Mhm.
of you,
Yeah.
the chart is not static, but the birth chart itself is static and it shows you what you're working with. And so
Right.
if you come into a session with me and you're like, wow, I have so many power issues with my partner,
Mhm.
and they dominate me, and I've always had partners who dominate me, and I
Mhm.
look in your chart and I see that there's something going on with your Venus or your moon or your Mars, that opens up a conversation and says, this is an implicit part of your experience. And that in and of itself can be really heavy for people to hear because they want to feel like something has happened to them rather than the fact that they have agency to acknowledge this as a piece of their story and then do something with it. So
Yeah.
I think that what we're doing in both of our practices is like we're like holding up the mirror a little bit.
Yeah.
And that can be really stressful, but it can also be very, very life changing.
Yeah.
And, yep, I think that that's important. And like, even in my friendship with you, you're very good at like holding up that mirror and just showing me what the heck I am doing in a very non judgmental way that has really, really helped me find the truth of things that bother me and like have language to talk about them with instead of just feeling like I'm in despair, like I have been, in my
Yeah.
whatever, my 20s or whatever. So, you're really good at that. But I think that that is the mark of someone who is doing this work. It's just, we're just reflecting something back to
Yeah.
you that you innately know and that you innately hold.
Yeah.
So I'll stop talking. Yeah.
That's very sweet of you, and you do the same. I feel often that I have big words, and you are the one to tell me like, "Okay, you're okay. But you're okay though, right? But you're fine. We're all fine." And then it gives me the opportunity to kind of get out of that thinking of like fix. How do I fix? How do I get out? How do I,
Mhm.
and you're very grounding and like, but like it's happening and it's in process, and we do that for each other, which is why we're soulmates, as I tell my husband all the time. Um,
I'm sure he loves that.
oh, yeah, completely. Um, I think that this kind of, as you're pointing out, like this fear to really look at ourselves critically, it makes sense. We have internalized criticisms that are playing in our head all the time, and so nobody wants more criticism.
Mhm.
But I think that the big issue, and I've thought about this a lot, like why do people need tarot readings today? Why do they need astrology readings more than
Mhm.
like they're, because you have that client who comes in, they're like, please tell me about myself. I
Yeah.
really need it. Oh God, I'm
Mhm.
desperate. And I get more and more of these people that feel like so unprepared to live their own lives.
Mhm.
And I'm so curious, like, what is the thing? And I don't think it's because we're like a bad species who doesn't know how to live. I think it's because we live in a society that is constantly undermining our own intuitive powers
Yeah.
of healing
Mhm.
and self-knowledge, and telling us to second guess them, and telling us that we don't know what we're talking about, and using that intuition is crazy, and all this stuff is just constantly in the background. And so to find that ability to trust ourselves is really, really hard. So I think
Mhm.
that, something that we can do with our modalities, whatever practice you have, whether you use something like tarot or astrology, or whether you simply use prayer or just journaling or reflection or whatever it is, I think that what can be really good is to not get so locked up in how am I healing? One of the things I hear, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, is like, oh, I've already worked through this. I'm really sad to see
Mhm.
it come up again, or I'm
Yeah.
sad to see it still there. And it's like, where did you think it was going to go? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's part of your story. And instead say, how am I in this process of becoming myself and fully being with myself, and as you said, holding the tension of myself. My analyst says this to me all the time whenever I'm complaining, and I just get into a complaining fit and I just keep yelling about the same things, and she's like, how are you holding the tension? I'm like,
Mm.
I'm not. I'm yelling right now. I'm yelling
I
about the
want you to
stupid
hold the
thing.
tension. Yeah.
You do it. How do we hold the tension? And holding the tension means being both committed to our sense of betterment, development, not feeling as ragged and broken and confused, which is how we feel when we're in the wound. We want to get through that portion of it, but also knowing that the wound does not stop. The wound does not stop being there. I think that as basic as it is, it's so beautiful. That Rumi quote, the wound is the place the light enters. And I
Mm.
think that the point of it is that the wound is the place we have consciousness come in. Not that
Mhm.
it's where we heal or where we get all better. Yes, maybe it's also where our poetry comes from and where artistic sensibilities come from, and there's light in that too. But it's really where consciousness comes in, where we can see ourselves most clearly is when we can touch the most tender parts of ourselves
Mm.
most deeply. Um, and I think we were talking about this before we jumped on. We both love this Jung quote that we couldn't find exactly what it is. But there's this quote that Jung has where he basically says, don't take neurosis away from the neurotic, or else you're like taking away the one thing he has.
The quote was
um,
basically like, "Let the neurotic man be neurotic."
yeah.
And then there's another one, it's like, "If you take it away, it's not a cure, but an amputation." And I think that
Yes. Yeah. This one
that's
here,
great.
he says,
Mhm.
to lose a neurosis is to find oneself without an object. Life loses its point and hence its meaning. This would not be a cure. It would be a regular amputation. And I love it. I want to hold my neuroses very dearly. Thank you very much. They're mine.
Mhm.
I've worked on them a long time.
Yeah.
I think that I think, I think that the idea of it being amputated rather than finding a cure is that what a neurosis is basically, it's like a weird pattern of behavior and self-criticism and anxiety and all these things that are just these neurotic tendencies we all have, that are how these wounds present in our lives outwardly and internally. And we're trying to fix them and heal them all the time. And if we take away the neurosis, we take away the opportunity to actually do that, whatever that healing work really is. We just amputate the problem. And we don't actually learn from it, because our neuroses, as Jung said all the time, one of my favorite quotes that he has is that neuroses, the gods have become our neuroses.
Yeah.
And that means basically that the bigger internal experiences, the archetypes of our existence, we don't feel them anymore. We don't process them anymore. And they get repressed and pushed down into these weird patterns of behavior and frustration, and self-neglect. And that becomes neurotic. And so we don't want to just say, I don't want to be so XYZ anymore, and I don't want to have that problem, and I just want to get rid of it. Instead, our neuroses are our best teachers.
Yes, we have to find
something.
acceptance for the things about us that are kind of bent and broken, and not try to eradicate them, because we're going to then lose a part of ourselves. So usually what happens, I think, is that we try to force those more difficult parts of our personality into what we would call shadow, or we try
Yeah.
to hide it. And
Yeah.
what happens when we do that is, again, it just gets louder and bigger
Yes.
and weirder and takes up more energy the more we ignore it. And I think that is a huge experience that a lot of us go through. And it's often what drives us to seek out healing finally, right? We all
Uh-huh.
have that kind of like come to Jesus moment where we're like, oh my God, I can't keep doing this to myself. I can't
Yeah.
keep avoiding this pain. And that often, we need like a rock bottom in order to get there, which is unfortunate. But we do really live in a world that has taken away our sense of community support,
Yeah.
and even like access to elders who have
Yeah. Oh my
wisdom.
God. I know. All
Right?
our
We
elders
have,
are more neurotic than we are. It doesn't help
yeah,
us.
again, and I like, as a New Yorker, I love a neurotic person, and one of my least favorite things about living in Oregon is that everyone's just kind of like,
Everyone's too well.
everyone's placid. They're not, though. They're lying. They're not
Yeah.
well, but they're just like, it's this weird passive aggressive kind of thing that's
No,
different,
not
so
here.
different.
Not New
No,
York. Everybody is
I
as crazy as can be.
I just think that that's how it should be. So yeah, anyway, that's aside, but I think that it is it's a blessing to at least have access to what is making you feel neurotic, because then you can kind of follow that thread
Yeah.
like we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that again, in our work, like, I think that I always feel like I stop short before calling myself a healer, because I
Yeah.
think that it is, like you said before, a kind of loaded, even scammy word. And we
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of people on the internet forcing down our throats that they can heal you and they can solve your problems. And I think that one of the great tests of our moment is realizing that only you can really address the
Yes.
issue that you have
Yes.
within. You can do it with the help of a, person that you trust. They don't have to be a licensed therapist. That can be a friend. It can be another kind of doctor. It can be your dreams. It can be,
Yeah.
something else that comes to you. And so facilitating relationship with nature and with the divine and with the voice within you through art or through any kind of creative exploration is just as valid as going to therapy. And we also have that taken away from us. Like, the agency that we have to self-heal, I think,
Yeah.
has been really diminished. So I
I
like
totally
astrology for
agree.
that too.
I think
Yeah.
I want to be careful about it too, because I think we have a tendency, especially in this like TikTok universe we live in now, to self pathologize,
Mm-hmm.
and self therapize. And I think that these are dangerous things to do sometimes, because because we over pathologize ourselves, as TikTok
Mm-hmm.
has proved. We love to give ourselves like diagnoses. Just love to do it. And I think that's it's just a way of escaping the actual wound. It's just a way of giving it a title. And so we don't actually have to do the work of investigating ourselves, because it's like, well, I have this.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, there it is. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but then what do you do with it? Because you still feel neurotic as hell, right? So there's still
Mm-hmm.
something to do now. I like this quote from James Hillman, who we love on this podcast, who is a depth psychologist. And he says that therapy or analysis is not only something that analysts do to patients, it is a process that goes on intermittently in our individual soul searching, our attempts at understanding our complexities, the critical attacks, prescriptions, and encouragements that we give ourselves. We are all in therapy all the time, insofar as we are involved in soul making.
Mm-hmm.
And what he means by soul making is very much this individuation work of self understanding, and this kind of healing idea that we know now to be the approach to wholeness and engagement with the soul and our profound sense of identity as it's meant to be, our sense of self. I think that that's something that we can all do. We all have the power, as you were saying, to do the healing work. You do not need a healer to heal. And I don't call myself a healer either, but I know that the work I do has profound healing potential if the
Mm-hmm.
person is receptive to seeing themselves as
Yes,
they are,
exactly. Mm-hmm.
which they're often not, but sometimes they are. And that's when you have those good sessions that you're like, yay, it worked. And then a lot of times afterwards, people are like, well, I don't know, I'll think about it. And you're like, okay, well,
But
maybe
you know,
later.
those clients will think about it, and I
They
think
will.
that again, it's the challenge of holding up the mirror.
Yes.
Sometimes people are not ready to see things,
Yes.
and you know, I'll get notes from folks who in session told me they had no idea what I was talking about and that I was wrong.
Uh-huh.
And then a year later, they'll be
Yep.
like, I really
Yep.
wasn't ready for that.
I
And
have those
now,
too. It's so
mhm,
great. And it's such a surprise and so wonderful. And, for those people who are healers out there and who are a little bit curious about how do they engage with their healing work and how do they understand it, I encourage you to think about it less as you are responsible for healing this person and more as your work is to find the thread of truth
mhm,
and encourage them to have the sense of faith and fortitude that they can see it and they can follow it
mhm,
themselves as well. And that's really the task. So take the burden off yourself and also watch out for that inflation
mhm,
as it comes in and says, I can heal you. And I think that that is an archetype that we try to embody, but not one we ever fully become, as it is with all archetypes. So, we can do the healing work and we can be healing practitioners, but we hold that all with a lot of reverence and a lot of openness for knowing that it's always a deeply internal and spiralytic process, as we mentioned before too. We're always
mhm.
moving around the same center, trying to approach it with more honesty each time.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay, so let's maybe do a dream now.
Hmm. I'm ready.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Mighty Networks, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds. Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Hello, my lovers of tarot, astrology, and the symbolic. Would you like to go on even deeper dives into topics that are even more niche and specialized and fascinating? Perhaps you'd like to explore angels in the tarot, or beasts in your dreams, or the thresholds of astrology. This is just a sampling of the bonus episodes we have over at our cloister. So go in the show notes and click the link and join us in even deeper conversations. We really hope to see you there. So this symbol we have is about a lightning strike, and it is both a synchronicity or a real event and a dream. My symbol is the lightning bolt. This has always been something I would draw throughout teenagehood, and even up to this day, I find I draw a cloud with an eye and a lightning bolt. I always believed that I was the kind of person to one day get struck by lightning until it actually happened to me about 1 month ago. I got struck by lightning on top of a temple in Thailand in January. Real story. I was in South Thailand at the Tiger Cave Temple. Since then, I had my first dream where I died in the dream and it was blank for a few moments, and I was still in the dream and came back as a spirit. Lightning had struck a building in the dream, which I ran into the way of, so they ran into the toppling building. It was only recently I made the link to the tower card in the tarot. I think that this would be a truly interesting deep dive. Okay,
Mm.
so lightning and the tower. First of all, I hope you're okay.
Yeah, my God. This is really crazy. I've
Yeah,
never heard of this before.
I
So, yeah, very interesting.
I hope you're well, and I hope you went to a like you weren't too damaged by getting hit by lightning, because
Mm.
that would be the scariest thing ever.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's interesting that you've always had this like feeling that you would get hit by lightning one day, and you always believed that that would happen to you. Um, I don't know. Sometimes these things feel a little premonition-y to me. Like we just get the sense that this
Mhm.
is just a thing that'll happen to us, and then it happens to us. Then there's other people who are of the school. It's like if you think the thing will happen to you, you're basically like there's almost like a invitation for that
Yeah.
thing to happen to you. So
Mhm.
people see it different ways. I don't know. But there's obviously some kind of link between you and lightning that has been there for a long
Mm.
time. And it's been in the psyche and it's been now realized fully. What are your first takes on this lightning episode?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about Zeus or Jupiter when I think
Yeah.
about lightning, and he
Yeah.
is the sky god and he is like the king of the gods. But to be struck by lightning by him is like to be struck down, usually.
Yes.
But I also associate that sort of flash of lightning as like the bolt of inspiration and the bolt
Yeah.
of yeah, new awareness coming through the
Hmm.
psyche. So while physically, I think it's extremely scary to be struck by lightning, like in real life, to have that sort of lightning bolt of insight or imagination or inspiration feels like it could be very life changing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, lightning is like I don't know if it's like a super rare weather event, but it only happens under certain atmospheric conditions. And
Yeah.
so, kind of like we're only able to be receptive to genius at, particular mental states
Yeah.
or places of inspiration or tuned inness to our work. And they say that lightning never strikes the same place twice as well. So it has a very once in a lifetime sort of
Hmm.
vibe to it, which is
I feel
interesting
like I
here.
saw a story about somebody who got hit by lightning like 3 times and survived.
Sounds like they're doing something wrong. So sounds like they're running around in an open field with a golf
They
club
need to
over
be
their head.
studied. I don't know what's going on.
Maybe they
Um,
have a metal plate
yeah,
on their
something
body somewhere. Who knows?
something
Anyway,
weird.
that's not nice of me. Okay.
I think that that's great. I think that the idea of lightning strike is as inspiration is really powerful, and then we have this kind of like we have that theme in where you were in a temple in Thailand,
Right.
so there's a
Yeah.
place of like like if we're
Bigness.
going to meet a god, this is the place to do it. So that's pretty huge. I also want to take it because we talked about the tower and you
Mhm.
literally had the most literal tower dream that you could have.
Yeah.
The tower is a card, and lightning, as speaking of like Jupiter striking us down with lightning bolt, it's a symbol for the breaking open of inflation,
Mm.
the cracking open of inflation. So when we talk about inflation, I think people get scared a lot. In my tarot class in the archetypal tarot school, I yell at students for like 8 weeks that don't be inflated. By the end of it, I think they're all like, "Am I deeply inflated of a person?"
Oh my God.
We all are. This is part of actually Edward Edinger is a great Jungian. Basically says like inflation is a necessary step in individuating because it makes us say, this is who I am and I own it, which is by having that level of confidence is an inflated act. And so inflation is a natural part of psychic experience where we basically what it means is that the ego expands beyond its normal proportions. We think ourselves better than everybody else, or we think ourselves extraordinarily special or important or whatever. We all have those phases, especially as children. Children are wildly inflated. Some of us don't grow up out of it, like me, and then have to deal with it at 22 and be like, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm not this special princess? It happens, and it's not something to be ashamed of, even though it does fill us with shame when we feel like we have that inflation cracked open, and we resist it, because then it means we have to look at ourselves more honestly, and then we panic and we're like,
Yeah.
I'm not who I thought I was, or has everybody seen this and I haven't? Has everybody seen that I'm not this perfect person? And so it's hard. It's a hard thing, but it's a necessary thing to go through. And it's a very natural thing. And so we see that in the Tower card. That's the symbol of the lightning bolt, Zeus's lightning bolt coming. And we see that like in the story of like Phaethon. Phaethon? Phaethon? I don't know how to pronounce that. But he like takes his father's sun chariot and is like, I'm going to drive it across the sky. But he doesn't have the powers to do that. He has no training to do that. He's not the god that his father is. And so Zeus has to be like, nope, strike you down and remove that inflation from you. And in the Tower, we see the same thing, where we've built this tower, this like image of ourselves that's impenetrable. We are this thing. And the only way to see ourselves in a more human way is to have it be shattered by the lightning bolts and broken apart. So I think that lightning, we can see that beautiful, inspiring side of it that kind of like inspires that godhood state, especially like being where you were. And then at the same time, it breaks down the godhood state and says, but you're also completely human. Find your humanness, right? Watch out for that experience of getting beyond yourself. And I don't know. We don't know which side it's on or if it's both sides, but I think it's something that we can investigate, that symbol coming in to say, where have we expanded beyond our mortal proportions in some part of the psyche?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that. I knew that you would have a great take on the Tower coming in here, and the idea of breaking open our inflation, I think, has a lot also to do with the process of healing. And,
Yes.
Really, I think that's why we chose this the submission for this episode, because we have to do this again to find a healed perspective and really look at what the heck was going on at the time that we were contacted by this like divine intervention. I'm curious about the chart of the lightning strike. So if whoever's listening to this and you're like, if you're ever struck by lightning, please, if you are okay, make sure that you get the time that it happened and the place that you were in, because I really want to know what that looks like.
That'd be wild to see. I think that as much as it feels like, I think that with the lightning bolt thing, we want it to be like this super special, incredible, beautiful thing. And it can be, but it also is a challenge. It's also like be broken apart a little bit. So there's both sides to it. And I encourage you to not worry. We're not, if you've had lightning dreams, you're not like a crazy inflated maniac person. It's just an opportunity to allow ourselves to be cracked open a little bit more and to kind of break down the structures that we've kind of been too ground into, especially like running into the tower. It almost feels like we should be running away from the tower as it falls and not be crushed under all of that debris coming down. The fact that we're running into it, there's almost like this, like, I'm still attached to it feeling, like I'm still part of it. Like I can't flee this and start over. So that's an interesting thing to investigate. The tower is definitely a card for you, listener, and hold that for a while. And don't be scared of it. It's good. It's one of the most powerful cards there are. And then afterwards we get the star, which is like, now you really find your divinity. That's where it really is. And it's much more powerful and far more real than this kind of tower idea. So
yeah, beautiful.
Cool.
Love it.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode on healing. And we hope you have a nice healing week. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining us on our Mighty Networks platform.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.